So today I'm joined by Pureza Oliveira. Thank you so much for joining Inside the Manege for this
happy to be
episode.
with you.
So for people who don't know you yet, you are the daughter of the now somewhat legendary classical writer Nuno Oliveira from Portugal.
Yes.
And you continue to be a representative of his work by, for example, translating some of his writings into English for the first time.
Yes, that was not long ago. I did that. I started many years ago. And if you don't mind me telling this at the beginning, when I decided to do this was, my oldest brother was a fantastic writer. Actually, my father, 1 week before my father died in Australia, he told me, and we were alone, so this was the truth. Your brother is the best writer I know. And he is, and he knew a lot of writers. And he knows at his age more than I knew at his age.
And this is João.
João Oliveira, yeah. He was a fantastic writer. Very different style. Very, very different. And it was very cruel. He died so young at the time that he was having success and everything by himself because he was always like a shadow of Nuno Oliveira, which is always a difficult position between artists, but it happens everywhere. It's very difficult. But they loved each other, but it's still difficult. And so after he died, I thought, there had already been some translations in English. We had some problems and nice people. Huh? No, I'm not saying bad things about anybody. And for several reasons, and they were not of the whole work. I said to myself, who's going to do it now? So I decided to do it myself. It took years. At the beginning, I would cry because I didn't know the terms. I'm not a horse person. And but little by little, I ended up, and then I had help from other people. So Xenophon Press, they have all the books of all the technical books, because there are 3 little ones of memories that are in the French edition. There are excerpts of them, not in the English edition. That's what they shows. And afterwards, so you have all these technical books, Xenophon Press, and then I did the translation of 60, I think it's 62 articles that my father, and I was quite moved because this was after COVID. I was there, I almost died because I was in a month and I was in coma and everything. When I got out, I started to make the translations of, so I was very moved of these articles. I was still a little bit sick, but it was good for me to be doing something. And the first translation I make, I was 4 months old when he wrote that.
Oh
So
my
I was
gosh.
quite moved. And I loved it. I love to do that. So Xenophon Press has also that.
Wow.
Of course, there are other languages, he has books all over. But
No, for me, it was really special when I saw that it came out because I had seen the German version, seen the French version, and I was thinking, why is there no English? And so I'm so thankful that you helped make it available in English. So
yes, I thought it was so important. I said to myself, no, I can, I'm okay because I did something. Because English is what we say in Latin, lingua franca, nowadays. One day to be another one.
no, thank you so much for that work. I think it means a lot to a lot of classical writers today because now they actually have access to his ideas and his philosophy and, his work.
Yes.
Because so
Of
many.
course, at the end, at Xenophon Press, I was helped by several people because it's not my maternal language and it needed to be. But I am happy I did that. And I'm happy it was me. Because very often, and I've noticed that because like for the classical principles, I was helped by a friend of mine, and we had 5 books around in Italian, in German, because she speaks German, in French, and sometimes we see that people, either it happened something and they missed a line,
Yeah.
which happens is human. Or sometimes, if they don't understand.
It gets lost in translation.
You say what I wanted to say in Italian is traduttore, traditore. So what is important for me, is that I stayed very, very near, like a policeman, to what he said, because I knew him.
Yes.
And although I'm not a rider, I was there very often, and I rode with him. And I don't say it's the best translation. I did my best. That's what I say.
Well, for me, it's really an honor to be able to speak with you and to share your story with everyone. This podcast the focus is really on classical riding, but also on the culture around classical riding, and I feel like you're a big part of that. So here we are now. We're in Portugal at Quinta do Brejo, and this is where your father was working, and you were growing up as well.
No.
No?
No. He bought this place, which now is quite different from how it was when he owned it in the 70s. So now I am 70. I don't know when it was, but now I'm 74. I was 17 when he bought this place.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and then he stayed too. And it's very funny because he bought a little piece down there where there was a little shack with a goat and a donkey. So he made his kitchen there so that he could come here every day and have somebody cook for him. And little by little, he started, and of course, he started to build the school, the riding, the arena. But little by little, he bought a little bit more upwards, a little bit more of land, built his house, built everything for the horses, and finally he moved here after, I don't know, 2-3 years, something like that. I don't remember. So before, most of his life, he was in several places, but not here.
He was in Lisbon before?
When he was young, he was on the other side of the river. He was in Quinta dos Arcos, near Azeitão. He was giving lessons there. He was working there in a beautiful, very beautiful place there for somebody else. He also worked, before he also worked in, what you call, it's not police, it's, I don't know the translation. But they have horses and they are sort of a police, but I cannot say. Guarda Nacional Republicana. So they have horses, he trained horses there. Then when I was 6, so I can't remember the dates, but people can, but all these in the Xenophone Press edition, there's a little book that is called Remembrances of 50 Years of a Portuguese Rider. It tells all this much better than I can say, and many, many memories.
And what was it like for you growing up with him doing his work? And for you, it sounds like you were moving around a lot.
Yes, we were in the other side of the river, but then I was not aware of that. So then we were until I was 6 in Lisbon, living in Lisbon. By that time, he was working in a place that was not his, but he was working in several places. He would go to the houses of these people who had their own horses and had their own arenas and all that. And then when I was 6, I remember one day we were in Lisbon, and in the morning he took me to go, had a cake outside, and then we went by the tram and then the bus. We went outside of Lisbon to visit his new place, which was some friends that was in the outskirts of Lisbon. This was a commercial place. They had next to it a big thing where they cut marbles and all that. And then he arranged this very well. And then it was the first time he had his own place. It was in Quinta do Chafariz, about 20 kilometers away from Lisbon. And that's where most of the most important things happened was there.
What was it like for you watching him work? Like, he's now so well known. He's probably one of, if not the most well-respected classical writer of the 20th century. But I mean, as you were his daughter and you were watching him work, what was it really like? What do you think set him apart from everyone else?
First of all, he belongs to a family, especially on his mother's side. They were of they were from Galicia, aristocratic, and they were very. My father was a little bit like that, you know. So I always, although we were very close and I understood him very well, we did many things alone together, listening to music, talking, and since I was little, I had a big respect for him, big, very big. It was not only because of the person he developed inside himself, but because they were like that. His mother, his grandmother, they were like that. Tell me your question again.
Yeah, what was it like to really watch him work? And like, what do you think really set him apart from, there were so many great horsemen at the time.
I didn't know that. I was not interested in that. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
For me, that's what I knew since I was born, you know. And in that riding school that I'm talking to you about, Quinta de Chafariz, there was many beautiful riders there, classical riders of families that also he had his pupils and friends. How do you say in English? Bullfighting riders, the best that were there, like João Núcio, for instance. And there I met, I knew since I was very little, since I was born almost, Diogo Bragança.
Yes.
Of course. He came to my father's place, the other place before there, the day I was born. So I grew up because I used to go, like when I left the school, not every day, but quite often, I would take the bus because we were living outside of Lisbon and I was studying in Lisbon since I was 6 years old. So I would take the bus and go to my father's school, and then for many reasons. So I was next to Guilherme Borba, Dom Diogo Bragança, many great writers that were all the time discussing about classical writing and that were born inside of it,
Yeah.
Portuguese culture and fantastic.
Just so for people who are listening, for a little bit of context, so Guilherme Borba, he ended up co-founding the Portuguese School of Equestrian Art.
Yes.
And also Dom Diogo de Bragança, he's a very good
José
rider.
Ataíde also, Miguel Távora was. All these.
He's a wonderful rider.
Filipe Graciosa, who was also the director. I grew up with all these people, these and more that I can't remember. All fantastic writers, all people with a lot of classical education.
And I think people know Nuno obviously more for his work with horses as a rider and a trainer, but as his daughter, I can imagine you understand him much more as a whole person and could see, parts of him that maybe other people weren't able to see. How would you describe really who he is, what he was like as a person? And yeah, if you saw anything that maybe other people didn't get a chance to see about him.
I don't know if I saw anything, but different from because you see my father, you could see the picture immediately, I think. He was a man with strong, extremely strong emotions, and the spectrum was extremely big, in one of his books, I think it's the Classical Principles. I cannot recall the whole sentence. There's a sentence by Verdi,
It's very important for Nuno.
very important for him, where he says, everything has to be true. I'm paraphrasing, if it's love, it has to be real love. Everything has to be true. And that's why he put the sentence there, it has, but never mediocre. That was my father. Never little, never mediocre, always big standards. When he was mad, you really had to run away from him. But it was like a tempest. You know, it was immediately, he went, and then disappeared. And then he was happy. And then, but he felt he was he was extremely sensitive. So he was very sensitive with people, if people betrayed him or were not true, because he never betrayed people.
I also heard, for example, there were some riders or some time when someone came to watch him ride and criticized him in some way, and he got very angry because he felt like they just don't see the artistry underneath what he's doing. Maybe technically it doesn't look perfect in this one moment, but that wasn't the point of the ride.
Of course, you cannot see one thing, a piece, and you have to see, to be aware of the whole work, what
Exactly.
point the horse is, what, you know, and my father was not always the same. He evolved. He was not born Nuno Oliveira, the greatest rider. He evolved.
Yeah.
And he worked like hell.
So what would have a typical day have been like for him?
My father, for all my life, most of until the end, just at the end of his life, he got up at 4:15 every day. Sometimes he would, most of the time he would go to bed quite late. Especially when at Christmas time in that arena, that school, they used to, all the men I talked to you about, the riders I told you, they used to organize, my father used to organize a 2-day huge manifestation where people rode very beautiful things. That was the product, how do you say in English? The money from that was to give to the poor people of the village. So at that time, sometimes you would go at 1 o'clock or sometimes sleep 3 hours only.
Wow.
But all his life, I knew he was getting up at that hour. What did he ask for? A typical day? So he used to so he went to the school, he used to work his horses in the morning, give at the end of the morning, if I'm recalling well, give some lessons at the end of the morning, come home for lunch, always in a taxi, because my father didn't drive. He had a carriage driving license, but didn't drive cars. Then go immediately 1 hour and go for lunch very quick, go to ride again his horses, then give lessons. And when I was young, most of his money was made at that time. Of course, the horses he rode were not only his, was horses that he was training for selling, for the lessons. There was quite a lot of horses in the lessons, all of them trained to do everything. Then at that time, when I was a kid and until teenage, there was these schools, it was boys only, schools in Lisbon. There was 2 or 3 schools. At the end of the day, they would come in big buses with lots of them, and then he would give lessons. This was bread and butter, you know, give lessons to all these young people, and some of them became later on writers.
He must have had so many students. If you
Thousands. Even today, oh, my mother was a student of your father. I say, who wasn't?
Yes, I have the same feeling. So many people say that they learned from Nuno, and I guess this is why. But who do you think were really like his closest students? And
But I must
especially,
tell you something important, is that he had thousands of students. But one day I was with Miguel Tavra. He came to Lisbon and he was giving, there was something in honor of my father, and he was speaking. And Miguel Tavra, who started with my father since he was a young boy, said, Nuno Oliveira had thousands of students, especially 30 years after he was dead. He has more and more students than before. But he said that in a more elegant way, which is true.
well, this is why I want to ask you is Who do you think were really like his closest students? And also, of the people who are still alive today, who do you think truly trained with him most closely?
Of today, I will not tell you because just no, it's preferable. And I don't know all of them. You know, there was 4 years I was not here, so I was in Belgium, I was in the States, I was here and there and doing other things. So I might be unfair. You know, of course, everybody knows for many reasons that Bettina Drummond but she was trained with him since she was
Very
a
young.
kid.
Yeah.
And Catherine Laurenti, and there are several very good, very good. But I prefer not to say because I was not here. I might miss somebody, and I know the horse world. You know,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
start to say things, all these ones. So all the names I told you are some of the he trained incredible people.
I mean, you were lucky enough to also ride with your father.
Yeah, since I was not like my brother. My father was to take him on his horse and ride to where he was going to leave lessons, and my brother was like even 2.5.
Wow.
So, but me, I started there. We had somebody, a bell, who helped my father, and we started. I did all the, how'd you say?
Vaulting or lunging?
Yes. Where you have to run and then go up on the horse,
Vaulting.
and do all these, and you get a really good position. And
Yes.
then I started to have lessons with all the young kids. Yes.
What were lessons with your father like, especially? What was he like when he was teaching?
He was a respectful person. He was just watching a lot and telling you things at the right moment. But I don't know, because that's the only person I rode with. Not the only, that's not true, but the main one. And that one thing that I remember, I was like 6 or 7 years old. I would never go on top of a horse without asking in Portuguese, mestre, dá licença? Would you say that in English?
You would say, Master, may I
Yes,
get on now?
and then and I was his daughter. I was behaving like anybody else. He was very attentive. He could be, sometimes he was. I remember after lunch sometimes, but that after lunch I was not there. But sometimes he was so tired because he worked so much and he slept so little. Sometimes he would doze off in the corner. And then people would say, Nuno Oliveira is sleeping. The horse, the left leg is a little bit behind.
He's seeing through his eyelids.
No, he was listening.
Wow. Are there a lot of things that he used to say to students or advice he used to give all the time you can think of?
Oh, that's a difficult question now. It will come to me maybe, but about the hands, give and take, give and take, give and take. The students would be better to speak about that than me. But
One thing I know, I wanted to ask, he really emphasized in his work how he used his back. And he had
it's so important, the back and underneath, your seat,
Yes.
your waist. But I'm not going to tell you things about a rider, it's all in his books.
All right. Yeah, and because people were wondering, he has a very specific posture. And so he also talks when he's teaching, look at my back, look how I'm using it. And so it's a very specific way.
Yes, the back is very important, yes, but it's in his books.
All right. Well, people can look at his books then to
I
find out.
think, can I tell you something about the books? All my life, I saw my father going to the classics and read until the end of his life. My father was very lucky because he had not only his cousin, Mestre Miranda, who had a big library and taught him lots of classical principles, but he worked for somebody who used to bring, in his youth, it was 23, 24, used to go to Paris, bring lots of old books and buy them here, and he had a huge library. And he said to my father, You can use the library whenever you want.
Is it only horse books, or he had books about
No,
everything?
no, no. We are talking about the horse library, the dressage library, how to say it in English. And my father, he, he he came from a family where they read a lot. They were very cultivated. It was in his blood to be like that. But he had a thirst for knowing and finding a solution for problems, which he never, as you know, or as he says, never one method here, one method. Each
Yeah.
horse is different, and he would try to find a solution. And I saw him until the end of his life, at 7 o'clock in the morning in his office up there, reading. And that's one thing that he says in his book, The Classical Principles. For instance, he says, people have to read what the masters said in the old times. So you get in a line.
Agree. This is something I've also talked about a little bit in previous podcasts. Is it's become sort of out of fashion for dressage riders to read, but you learn so much by looking at the old masters, just to hear how they solved problems. And there's a really interesting, I think it was Bettina Drummond who said she would often see him. He had like a little library in the arena, and if he had a problem, occasionally he would ride over to the library, take a book down, open it on the horse, and check a passage and put it back on, and then ride the horse.
Yes, in the old riding school, you had the arena and then the gallery, and there you had the books there, so you could go leave the horse for 2 minutes and go up there. Yes.
Yeah. Was he staying up late reading? You said he didn't sleep so much, but what was he doing so late, or was he riding?
No, he would come home quite late, very often 9:30. We had dinner quite late for young people. And no, because his books, I don't remember, because I would go to bed, at night. I was young, but like I told you, very, very often what happened is that, he would stay with Guilherme Borba and Taíde and Diogo Bragança and Sostin da Costa and all these big legends. They would go out for dinner and discuss, and they would stay hours talking about lightness and rassemblée and impulsion and impulsion, rassemblée and lightness. And it was a passion. This was a passion. I heard so many of those discussions, and I was young, and I would go to sleep. Again, on impulsion.
For so many of us, I think it would have been.
They were passionate.
Yeah.
They were really passionate. They lived the passion.
It would have been amazing to sit in on those meetings.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. For people who really wanted to, like you were drinking from source.
I want to also ask about his role model or his teacher, Mr. Miranda. Could you talk a little bit about maybe if Nuno mentioned how he talked about him, what his experience would like?
He really loved him. He lived in more or less the same area of Lisbon. Is an old part of Lisbon, quite beautiful, where my father lived, my grandparents. But he had to, so as soon as he left school, he would run up there and try to spend most of his free hours, and sometimes miss school to go there and sit with him, because it started like that. Because while he knew him, my grandfather, his father, used to ride, but jumping. So he used to ride with Miranda, because he was a faraway cousin, like third degree cousin, something like that. So my father, as I said, it was a passion in me. He describes that also in his writings. I think maybe the one of his memories, 50 years of a Portuguese writer. And he spent many, many hours there, and Mestre Miranda was teaching him, always talking to him about classical writing. And of course, he respected him immensely. And I have some, not me, but it's in my brother's house. There are letters from Mestre Miranda to my father, There are writings from Master Miranda, strict rules even for the way you dressed.
For people who aren't familiar, who was Mr. Miranda? Where did he work, and what were the rules, for example, that he had?
That I cannot tell you, but I tell you one thing I discovered not a long time ago. It doesn't concern my father, but it was his style. Where did he was the picador da Casa Real. That means he was the écuyer of, I don't know, riding master?
Yeah, the riding master.
Écuyer of the Portuguese royal house.
For the royal family.
For the royal family, yes. So, but I discovered something, quickly I'll tell you. Among the papers of my father, they remain with my brother. Not with Sarah Oliveira, it's his daughter. She has that in Belgium. I discovered little books. So for the men must have been the same. Where he, on his own writing, he would give these little books to every woman that would come to ride Amazon. From what she wore underneath, to the type of fabric, to the pins in her hair, to the way she would do her hair, to how to go up to the horse, everything is specified there.
Oh.
So, and the way you dress was very important. And I remember my father saying they went to accompany one king to the cemetery. It was a march, and my father went also. And he had to give him because my father didn't have the proper things. Nowadays, we don't live like that.
But he was really a noble person, no?
Who?
Mr. Miranda.
I don't know if he was aristocratic, from aristocrats, I don't know. But he was noble, of course. You don't need to be.
Nobility to be noble. No, but with just the gentlemanly sort of appreciation of how things are done, it sounds very similar.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to ask is, how would you say your father related to horses, like his relationship to them, and how do you think he really felt with them?
With respect. Because he always says there's no rules, precise. There's no methods, not rules, methods. Each horse is a different being, like people. So, and knowledge, the rest I cannot tell you because I'm not a writer, and of course he's so much higher in knowledge than I could be, so I don't know. But I think it's mainly with respect and love. For instance, love for sure, passion immensely. My father was a passionate man. Everything he did was always if he was hungry, he was angry with you, really, you wanted to go away. If he was in love, he was passionate. If he was happy, he made us all laugh, But every time my father had to sell his horses because he had to feed his family and feed the horses and pay the salaries and buy food for the horse, all this. He would cry, and for a week he would be in such a bad mood and sad and depressed. But then every time, and Luís Valença can tell you that, he has lots of stories like that. Every time he bought a new horse, it was the best. Never had any horse that was as good. I'm in love with this horse. I'm in love. I never had a horse like this. That's the way he was.
What was it like to watch him ride?
When I was little, listen, I had no critical spirit because because that's all I knew. And actually, I didn't need to know anything else. It was the best. But when I was very, very young, I was little still. In school, I used to say very proudly to all my colleagues, comrades, I don't know how you say that, the other little girls.
Yeah.
Because teachers used to do a thing that I think is not something you should not do. What did your father do? What does your father do in life? So everybody would say, what's it? And I said, my father is an artist, and it's the biggest artist in the world. So they would make fun of me, but I was convinced he was a big artist. I was right. No?
I think so as well. So he must have had, gosh, so many horses throughout his career. Were there?
Many, because he rode many horses for other people when he was young. He started very young. At 14, he was already training at Master Miranda's school.
Do you think there were maybe one or a couple horses that really stood out to him or were especially
Yes, there
special
was,
to
I
him?
can't remember, but there was horses
Yeah.
that stayed. Who remembers always those things? If anybody wants to ask, go to Visual Lancer before he disappears, because he knows everything. He remembers everything. He knows the name of the horses, the collars, where he bought them. He went with him to, and for sure he had passions. He had passions, certain horses. But I tell you a very funny story. I think it was Beaugest. We loved Beaugest. It was this beautiful, how they are. And there was this American actor that started to come when in my teens, started to come to that old school. He made these movies, cowboy movies. He was a big guy with muscles and everything. He wanted to buy that horse. There was also a student of my father who many people that were there know. Mito Chizon was a Philippine lady. And he wanted, the American actor wanted to buy the horse. But my father didn't think it was too big. It was maybe not as refined. Excuse me. And it was different type. And so he came with his checkbook open and signed in white and said to my father, put whatever value you want. And my father sold the horse to the lady because she was small, little, much more refined, and for much less money. I mean, he could have put there any son he wanted.
It was a better match for the horse.
That's how he loved horses and respected them.
Yeah.
More than the money.
Yeah. I wanted to come back to, you said that your father was an artist, and I think most people agree he really got to the level of writing where it became an art. And then I want to pivot a bit to your story because you're also an artist. Do you think that seeing your father working or, this sort of spirit that he had influenced you and your journey towards becoming an artist?
Well, it was not only him. My mother was a fantastic poet. She wrote beautiful sonnets and she was a very sensitive woman and very cultivated. And so it was not only him, it was her also. And let's go further back. The person he most loved in his life was his grandmother, Clotilde. She lived in the same house as him they lived in the same house. She was an extraordinarily well cultivated woman. She spoke 6 languages, wrote in them, and she wrote with several Portuguese writers. She painted marvelously. And she was a big influence to my father with classical music, opera, and all that. So this happened already. This comes from her, from his father. My grandmother also played the piano, and something that made my father very unfortunate, very unhappy. He tried to play the piano, and she said, "No, you have peasant's hands."
Oh dear.
Made him very unhappy until the end of his life. And lightness in the end. That's all he spoke about.
He used it in a different way.
Yeah. Okay.
If people are hearing about you for the first time through this podcast, how would you describe yourself to them?
I don't know. I'm still a work in progress.
As are we all. Yeah.
I don't know how other people can describe me. I don't know how to describe myself, except for things that are not the true description of people. How old I am, I'm 1.5 meters, how much I weigh, color of my eyes, what do I do? But that's not a person.
But then you're open, I suppose, to becoming someone every day and seeing what happens. Very nice.
I can describe myself in this way. I try to be happy, and be fair. The rest, we'll see.
How do you think your experiences growing up and with your father being who he was and doing what he was doing, how do you think it kind of shaped your life or who you've become?
Immensely, immensely, immensely. In one way, one of the best things that my father gave me is liking some sort of music. Every Sunday, he was home only he would come every night, but being home, he worked Sunday mornings also. So in the afternoon, usually, he would sit in a sofa and go to sleep very often, read his newspaper. But I spent my childhood on Sundays sitting on his lap and listening to those, the small records with the thing that goes around like this. How do you call this? I don't
Yeah, a
remember.
record.
Yeah, Beethoven. I know Beethoven from left to right and right to left. At that time, it was Beethoven, and I inherited the taste and the ear for that, and it was magnificent to me, because even today, my soul can listen to these things and be full. And so the taste for music here, quite often we did when I was here, midnight in his office, look at the stars, listen to an aria of opera in 10 different versions. Smoke at that time, unfortunately, I smoke, and drink cognac with him. And we stayed 2 hours listening to that. What do you like best? What do you think of this one? What do you think of that one? What do you think of this voice? It's very funny.
And I heard you also heard a lot of opera in the riding hall. He used to ride all the time to Verdi, I heard.
Everybody did, even in the village, because he put it so loud. He had four phone loudspeakers, and we were in the village. He started at 8 o'clock in the morning. There was already. He started earlier, but in the village, people were working the fields at the sound of Verdi. And many students came and said, "Oh my God, we have to listen to, in order to watch him, we have to listen to this awful thing all the time." Many of them left loving opera.
Makes a big impact.
I used to go to the opera with him often. And the first time I went, I now know, because of things I remember of that opera, that it was an opera from Mozart, in Noce di Figaro. And before we went to a restaurant, very chic restaurant with all the guys with the white towel and everything. And I was so happy because I was maybe 6 or something. I felt like a lady. And I had this beautiful man, just there for me. And I was alone with him. But I was really feeling very ashamed because underneath the towel, my feet couldn't get to the floor. But then we went and he gave me chocolates and we listened to opera. We used to go very often. My mother used to go also, but she liked more romantic music, not so much opera.
So it sounds like the whole family was really quite artistic. And I wanted to also ask about the art that you do. You make really beautiful, beautiful silk scarves.
Do you like that?
I love them. They're stunning. And I really recommend people have a look if they're interested. Could you talk about, how you created them and sort of the artistic, how you came to, be an artist and make what you have?
I always drew since I was very little. And I remember the best thing my father did when he started to go to Switzerland first, before he went. First, it was in Switzerland that he was started to be known abroad.
Where in Switzerland?
Oh, Zurich and Geneva, and even, there's lots of videos of him making presentations there. Le Parc des Oliviers, the first, even there's this fantastic story where he had, the next day, he went to Switzerland to make a presentation with 2 horses, and the horses went by train. The horses were supposed to be picked up the day before the exhibition, somewhere at the outskirts of Geneva. And nobody went there. And it was the rush hour, and my father, not knowing very well Geneva, rode one horse, took the other one by the, how do you say, the reins, and crossed Geneva with the horses on horseback.
He made it happen.
But he used to do that in Lisbon when he was young, you know. Even go to the other side of the river, make 50 kilometers on a horse.
Wow.
All that. So he used to bring me these fantastic carandache.
A what?
Carandache is a brand, a beautiful brand of color pencils, or nowadays many other things. So he knew that was the best thing for me, because most of my life that's what I did, like most children do, you know. So then I went into art school in Portugal, in Belgium, in Chicago, and that's where I learned about fabrics. I also was weaving also. Not only silk, I also did use like oil and acrylics and drawing and all these. Nowadays, I'm not doing that much, because I want to live, and it's a lot of pressure. You're working all the time, and nowadays I'm older. So now what I want to do, really, I have a 150-year-old Portuguese loom, beautiful loom that is sitting in my house, and that's what I want to do for this winter. Do my loom, look at the trees, listen to nice music, meditate, and be quiet. I've done that exhibition I sent to you. It's so beautiful. I usually don't say good things about my work. I always point to faults, but that exhibition was really beautiful. So I did that. Now I want to be quiet.
Yeah, you sent me this exhibition. It's really beautiful. People can see them on your website as well. But
prefer that they go to YouTube and see it.
yeah. Okay, I'll put a link down in the description of this video so people can have a look.
The problem is the music is so loud, but it was a nice. But people have to learn to be aware of one thing. What is there? I started with white silk. I painted it, fixed it, and sewn it.
Oh. And I mean, recently you've been, from what I've seen, more busy with, for example, translating this book. It was Equestrian Art, the collected early writings of Master Nuno Oliveira with Xenophon Press.
The later works and the early
and
works.
the early ones.
And this summer I did something that I'm very happy I did, and I would like to do more, but Portuguese publishers don't seem to be very interested in that. It was the county of Mafra that offered this to me, to make a translation of the classical principles, which I think is for me the best, you know, because everything is in there. When I was and I decided, I asked them if I could, and they paid this. They published it. It's quite a nice little book in Portuguese.
And is it only available in Portuguese?
No, it's available in the Xenophon Press edition. Everything is there.
Okay, yeah.
But in Portuguese, there's almost nothing, because my father wrote directly in French.
That's why.
His French was very good. It was a family that spoke several languages very well, and he learned his French with his grandmother. And so I decided, okay, if you pay me if you do this, because you needed a good designer to, I think this book is important, and Portuguese should have, not everybody speaks well English or speaks well for the terms, technical terms. So it was a huge pleasure for me to translate this, because I translated it from the manuscript, as I did with the help of Désiré du Pisani for the English version. I translated it directly from the manuscript because, for instance, the French version with a how to say, my father said yes to it. She put it in nice French, you know. Here, although it's in French, behind the French, I can listen to the Portuguese, a man that is thinking in Portuguese. So it is easy to make a translation into a way that you can listen to him. And I was listening, and I could see everything that is in there. It was just like the lessons he gave when he was in the school. You know, I could see the horses doing what, I could see him telling to people, do this, do this. You can see that in this book. This book is precious for people to know what to do. All of them are, but this book, the classical principles of the art of teaching horses, something like that, is fantastic.
Yeah, I
And
really
simple. You know the difference? Can I tell you this? Okay, the last things I translated from him some years ago, before this one, were the articles he did in the 50s. In the 50s, he was 20-some years old. They are very interesting, but all of them, you can already feel the passion of these young men. But all of them is showing you all the time his erudite readings, what he knows, how he applies it, everything. Kind of is proud. My father was a proud man, huh? Something that you couldn't do is to hurt his pride. He had reasons to be proud, many. But he had some pride in showing how much he knew. In this race, this book is one of the last ones he wrote in Australia after he was training. So he would be quiet in his hotel. He wrote all these in one go. He doesn't need to show anymore anything. His language is extremely simple, straightforward, because it's a master. And the more you know, the simpler you explain things.
it's true.
Yeah.
Maybe we're coming close to an end, but I really want to ask, is there maybe a story of your father which you feel like isn't told very often, but you feel like says a lot about him or is important?
Oh, there are so many stories. He was a very special person, not only in writing, you know. He had a sense of humor and a sense of theatrical things. So I've written many of them that go around, but not in a book.
What's an example?
As an example, for instance, now I'm remembering, but this is, I think it's, maybe, I don't know if it's well known or not. My father once, I was there in the old school, and there was this journalist that came from Paris. I don't know if he wrote for one of those very well-known horse magazines. And he came. He was just coming that afternoon and then leaving for Orly. And he came, and this was the arena down, and here was the how'd you say, gallery? Mm-hmm. And in the gallery there was, my father had like a piece of furniture inside of which you had all the records. He had always a fantastic collection. And you had those LP players that you put 10 records at, and my father said before the man came, you will put this one. I was like 17, 16, something like that. Put this record after this one, and then they would drop, you know. And then my father starts to ride. The man came for this interview, and she was in the gallery. My father would go riding, smoking all the time, smoke, with his cigarette on his mouth, hanging from his mouth, would stop, say, ha, to the horse, and then would whistle, listen to the opera, whistle, go again. And then he stops the horse, he looks up to the gallery and says, vous savez, monsieur, you know, I would like to be, actually, what I would like to do in life was to be a tenor, an opera singer, but I don't have any voice. So I write in order to be able to listen to opera. You know, the man went away without any interview. Never, because I don't know, he had things like that. He would do like this, he had these huge eyes, he would do like this to me and laugh. And he decided that day he would only speak about opera, not about horses. He liked to do this kind of things, and he was enjoying it immensely, making this piece of theater. That was him.
Bit of a jokester.
Yeah.
If you could leave people listening with one memory or idea or maybe a message from you or your father, what would you say? It can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about horses.
Do things with lots of passion and love and openness, but really, you only can do something if you really love what you're doing. So try to do in your life what you love, if possible, all the time.
I think it's good advice.
That's what he did.
And he became, an amazing person who inspires a lot of people. So.
Yes, but let's not forget one thing. A huge amount of work. I never saw anybody work so much,
Yeah.
And huge honesty towards the horse, toward his art. It counts a lot. Work.
I think it's important for people to know, that also makes the difference.
I also think, maybe he worked too much. Too much. But also he smoked too much. So he died very young. And thanks God he died young. Because he left everything he knew to people. But he was in a very bad condition physically. And he might be paralyzed after. He didn't know that. I knew, because the doctor told me. So it was good he died young, because, he said he's going to finish in a wheelchair. And the man with that strength, it would be impossible to, he was not an easy man, huh? He was not an easy person. It's difficult to live with. Passionate, but difficult to live with. And so a very interesting person, but very difficult to live with. It was difficult with himself, even. So,
yes.
So God did things the way they should be done. He went to bed with his Walkman, listening to Verdi, and then he passed on to the other realm. So, good.
Well, he continues to be a huge inspiration for so many riders, and I just want to thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, I loved it.
Because, it's so special to hear, directly from you about your story and your experiences and the stories about your father, because there's not so many people who can really speak directly to it anymore. So it means a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.